So we're right on schedule, which is so great. Our last speaker for today is one of the MAT attorneys, Karl-Christian Johannessen. Go take it away, Carl.
Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. All right. Is that the correct slideshow, Leslie? Anyhow, so my name is Karl-Christian Johannessen. I'm a staff attorney with the Minnesota Association of Townships. I want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon and going through these presentations this morning. They've all been really informative. A couple of housekeeping notes before we move much further. At our website, I believe there are some links you can find. You can find handouts for this presentation. One of which will be an outline. That'll be kind of a summation of the slides, providing some statute, maybe some greater detail in places, as well as an area to write notes if you have any. There's also a sample resolution going over animal bounties that will go over in further detail later in the slideshow, as well as a sample notice letter for any noxious weeds that will also go over later in this slideshow. So just a topic, this is the danger of nature. We'll be looking over the town powers and their obligations when it comes to both noxious weeds as well as destructive animals. And so just overall, what this will look like is we'll first talk about noxious weeds, a quick summary of the law. I know we already went through that earlier today, but I want to provide some things more related to local weed inspector duties, which town officers are. We'll then look at local weed inspector duties more specifically, and then the specifics related to control and enforcement. Then we'll just look over nuisance animal issues. So this includes bounty, nuisance animals, protected animals, beavers, because they're a little bit different beast entirely when it comes to legal issues, and then farm animals at large. And then we'll finish out with a quick glance at animal pounds. Towns have powers related to that, and we'll discuss kind of the scope of that. So first, for a summary of noxious weeds, the Noxious Weed Law is found in Minnesota Statutes Chapter 18. These are types of weeds that are damaging to the public, to property owners, agriculture, and the environment. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture creates a list of weeds that are considered noxious. They break them into tiers. The biggest distinction is a kill tier or kill tiers versus prevent tiers. In the kill tiers, you have to destroy the weeds. This is not just preventing a greater spread. This is essentially a seek and destroy situation that would include pulling or removing the weeds and then later burning them. Whereas prevent would be like mowing the weeds. And again, the Department of Agriculture has created lists, breaking them down into tiers so that you as a local weed inspector can address what needs to be done to the landowners when there are issues. If there are any questions, one thing I'm going to reiterate over and over again is reach out to your county agricultural inspector. They'll help you through this process. They'll ensure everything is being followed correctly and ensure that noxious weeds are being limited as they should be. Again, breaking these into tiers that will kind of discuss the emergency or the urgency or need to eradicate in the ways that the town can get rid of them. This also, these tiers limit the ability for these weeds to be transported. We'll go over this again in duties, but towns have certain roles when it comes to noxious weeds being transported. The Noxious Weed Law both requires inspections and enforcement, and these powers are given partially to different local groups. This includes town officers, city mayors, and county officials. And again, the Department of Agriculture is involved in this as well. Just in general, the county officials are going to be your county agricultural inspector. They're going to ensure that all these weeds are being destroyed. They're being, the right steps are being taken. They're in communication with the county attorney to figure out if there's any sort of non-response, what to do there. Whereas town officers and city mayors are the local weed inspectors. County agricultural officials just don't have the manpower to go out throughout the county and inspect the county and ensure that all the lands in the county are following. And so that power has been handed down to township officials and city mayors, who can either themselves do the weed inspection, or if they have the ability, they can hire agents to assist in that weed inspection. And we'll go over those duties here in just a moment. So the local weed inspector duties, you have 3 basic duties. You have the duty to inspect all lands. This not only means township roads, but it includes private land throughout the township. If you notice any noxious weeds, you'll make sure that they are eradicated or that the spread is prevented. You'll go through different processes to ensure that that is occurring. And then you'll also issue permits for transportation if the weed can actually be transported. Some weeds require destruction there on the property. Other weeds can be transported to another facility to ensure destruction. Other duties would be to attend local inspector trainings. This can make sure that the town is up to date on all the duties, that the town can get advice or aid in making sure what needs to be done in order to make sure that the weeds are being destroyed, that issues are being limited. And then finally, a town will produce an annual report. Again, you can work with your county agricultural inspector to make sure all of this is being done properly. One thing I do want to take note of is these basic duties. When you're inspecting all lands, the recommendation is to do it twice a year. The first time is around May or June, when you'll be seeing a lot of these weeds coming into bloom, coming into mature stages. And this way the town can get ahead of the curve, make sure that they are not in a place before these weeds are able to spread, but all at the same time in a place where you can identify these weeds. Then the next time you'll inspect is if you have found any noxious weeds. The second time will be later in August, where you then go out and inspect all the lands to make sure that the weeds have been eradicated or that preventative measures have been taken. If you do find any noxious weeds, here in the sample packet, I've provided a sample letter. This is just what the sample letter is, fairly generic. It identifies who you are. It identifies your authority. It identifies the steps that need to be taken. It identifies that you will be re-inspecting the property, give a time frame for that. It talks about what failure to comply will look like. And then it'll give any sort of contact information that you need. Like was discussed earlier, oftentimes in townships you have family and friends, and sending individual notices to family and friends can have other issues, other social issues. And so it might be beneficial to address this as the township board or each member of the township board, rather than the singular town supervisor who inspected the property. Again, your county may already have this letter. If your county is utilizing kind of a sample letter, work with your county agricultural inspector to make sure that you're using the one that's best for your county. Now we'll dig into more of these control and enforcement specifics. So at the beginning of the season, the county agricultural inspector must give a notice to landowners. This notice will let landowners know that inspections will be coming out, that people will be coming onto their property to inspect if they have the need to. And town supervisors aren't needed to then give this notice. Again, this is a county agricultural inspector duty. If there is non-compliance, so if you have gone out, looked at lands, you've seen issues, you've identified issues, then later in the year when you come to re-inspect and notice that that's not remedied, reach out to your county agricultural inspector. Just generally on law, what it tells you is that a notice of noncompliance is issued by the local weed inspector. But to make sure that all these processes are being followed correctly and being followed the way that's most efficient for the county, it will be best to reach out to your county agricultural inspector for help. One note I want to make here is if this happens on state land, you can reach out to both your county agricultural inspector as well as the Department of Agriculture, and they can help you through this process of making sure that state land, such as DNR land, is being, noxious weeds are being mitigated on that property as well. If noncompliance is not addressed, so if these landowners, even after receiving this notice of noncompliance, the local weed inspector may destroy the weeds or contract to have the weeds eradicated, and then the costs will be charged against the landowner's property taxes. Again, if noncompliance happens and noncompliance persists, it is best to reach out to your county agricultural inspector for the proper next steps, for the general timelines given in the county, as well as any enforcement measures that the town may have, any enforcement measures that the town may need, or an assessment that the town may need. One last thing I want to talk about here on local weed inspector duties is that you have liability protection. This liability protection extends to inspectors for their activities specifically related to noxious weed inspection and enforcement. This liability protection protects against trespass actions. So by entering onto landowners' property, usually you would be run into trespassing issues. But here, because this is a duty given by Minnesota law, you are also given protection by Minnesota law to what may be trespass or may be considered trespass. You're provided liability protection for that. If you do notice noxious weeds, it may be good to reach out to the landowner. Just let them know, hey, I found some noxious weeds. I'm going to inspect your land just to make sure that what I noticed was correct. And then this liability also extends to any claims for damages from control measures. So again, if there is continued non-compliance, this liability protection protects against control issues. With that, I'll take any further questions or any questions at the end, and we'll go over a little bit of everything, but let's move on to nuisance animals. First thing I want to talk about is animal bounties. So animal bounties can be established. These are a permissive action. It's not a required action. They can be established by the county board and the township board. It's not as if one is in place, the other can't establish. Both can establish bounties at the same time. The town may be a conduit for the county board for county collection. And when the town does that, they will usually provide the fees or provide the bounties to the bounty hunters. And after providing those fees, they will provide an itemized list to the county to receive reimbursement. But that process will be maybe different in your county. And if your county is having you be the conduit, follow the process that the county has given you, and then things should be followed correctly. So bounties can be established for gophers, and there are several types of gophers: gray gophers, striped gophers, as well as woodchucks, ground squirrels, as well as coyotes. These bounties are established by resolution. You don't have to have a resolution for each separate type of bounty. It can all be in one, but depending on the type of animal, the means of collection may be different. And so you would want to address that, especially in the resolution. This is also true if there are any questions related to how much you would get. So maybe you would offer someone more for a coyote than you would say for a gray gopher. These resolutions do have to be renewed annually. You can't just pass it one time and say you're good. It does have to be renewed annually. This can be renewed at something like your township reorganization meeting. This can be one of the issues that you address if you do have bounties in your township. Again, like I discussed earlier, the town may be a possible conduit for the county. The county may be trying to receive bounties through the township, using the township to assist in local areas. And then after that, the town will provide something like an itemized list to the county to destroy or to get reimbursed for those costs. After you've received the materials you requested, you must then destroy that. Usually this is going to be, well, in the statute 340, Minnesota statute 348.13, this discusses the town board chair, but if you have a designated person, you can hand that off to the designated person to destroy the materials. So the question then becomes how to collect. For gray gophers, striped gophers, and woodchucks, you must receive all 4 feet. 4 feet, rather than the actual animal itself, you can receive the 4 feet. There are stories in townships of people receiving just glass jars of gopher feet, and they'll say, "Oh, I have 50 gophers here," and town board will respond, "Are you sure?" And the resident will reply, "I can open that and you can see," and sometimes the town board will just acquiesce and accept that there are 50 feet there. If it's ridiculous, obviously be careful, but sometimes those things may happen. But generally, you're to collect 4 feet from gray gophers, striped gophers, as well as woodchucks. Also, you can just collect the front feet for pocket gophers rather than all 4. In Olmsted County, you can receive the tail from the gophers. And so if you are a township in Olmsted County, you can state that you would prefer tail, or you can state in your resolution that collection is through tail rather than front or than the feet. In the statute, it won't specifically state Olmsted County, rather it'll say the counties in Minnesota that have 400 or 45,000 people, between 45,000 and 49,000, according to the 1950 census, and that only addresses Olmsted County. The last thing that the town has to do is, and this is between town and resident submitting the bounty, but the town must identify both the person, receive their name, address, other identifiers like that, as well as where the animal was killed, to make sure that it was inside the township so that they're collecting the bounty, again, from within the township. I forgot to go over this, but how to collect for coyotes and ground squirrels. Minnesota statute doesn't provide a defined method. So for ground squirrels, you could ask for the tail, same with the coyotes, or you could ask for the feet to make it similar to the gophers. Again, there's not a defined method, but so the town board can address that. Like I said earlier, in your packet, you should have a sample resolution. This is the first page of that resolution. The second page includes just the attestation as well as a place for signatures. But in short, this resolution is fairly open for the towns to modify. If you see optional or any other italicized areas, that's where the town can insert its own identifiers. So just quickly, this resolution gives authority to town officers to, or indicates town officers' authority. It indicates the need for bounties. It indicates why the board is looking for bounties. And then it resolves to take the animals listed You can limit the bounty to only apply to gophers or ground squirrels or coyotes. The board can limit the months in which it will receive bounties. The town can limit how coyotes, ground squirrels, or Townsend Olmsted counties collect gophers. It indicates how a person must identify themselves. It indicates the amount that the bounty should be. This does differ from town to town. There's not a set prescribed amount under Minnesota law. If you're looking for kind of just what's the general number in the area, you can reach out to local townships, or you can reach out to the county and kind of get a gauge on how much is being used. Again, if the town is being used as a conduit, section 6 or subsection 6 dictates how a town can be reimbursed for that cost. And then 7 is an additional space for any other requirements or limitations that the town board would like to impose. So the next we'll discuss nuisance animals. Again, as it says at the top here, the township is involved very little, but towns still receive frequent questions about this, how they can take preventative measures, how the town can get help in this area. And here we can see different areas where the town can point to for these people to get help in order to remove these animals. So there's a couple of different categories. So first you have animals like the bounty animals. So your gophers, your ground squirrels, as well as your coyotes. Those animals can be taken in and out of season. Or there isn't a season for these animals. You don't really need to have a set allowance or set requirements to take those animals there. It's essentially always open season. However, some animals can be taken without a license or without a permit if they are causing damage, if they're being a nuisance. Normally what this is going to be is destruction of crop. This also can relate back to destruction of other real property. So if you have rodents burrowing into houses, that would be cause for taking. In general, there's a long list for these animals, but we can run through those here. So this would include bats, snakes, salamanders, lizards, weasels, minks, squirrels, rabbits, hares, raccoons, bobcats, foxes, opossums, muskrats, or beavers. Some of these animals, specifically the mink, raccoon, bobcat, fox, opossum, muskrat, or beaver, the landowner who takes them, or the landowner's agent, an agent is any person who is allowed by the landowner, essentially has the authority given to them by the landowner to take these animals, but they must contact a conservation officer with Minnesota Fish and Wildlife immediately after taking the animal. This isn't a prior action. This isn't receiving permission. It's allowing the conservation officer or giving them knowledge of numbers that they normally care for and keep track of. And so this just gives them some indication as to what occurred and what has been taken. Again, this only applies to minks, raccoons, bobcat, foxes, opossums, muskrats, or beavers in that previous list. This list can be found in Minnesota statutes 97B.655. And again, that list is extensive. It mostly relates back to smaller animals, as well as bobcats, foxes, opossums, muskrats, and beavers. The next group are protected species. These species are locked down. You cannot take these species outside of the proper time, or if you have received a permit from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. You can potentially receive a permit out of season for nuisance animals, but again, you have to reach out to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources if any of this is occurring. There are two main groups that these species are split into. Your first are your big game, so your deer, moose, elk, bear, antelope, and caribou, as well as your small game. This includes game birds, fisher, pine marten, gray squirrel, fox squirrel, cottontail rabbit, snowshoe hare, jackrabbit, raccoon, muskrat, and beaver, lynx, bobcat, cougar, wolf, red fox, and gray fox, as well as wolverine, opossum, badger, mink, otter, short-tailed weasel, and long-tailed weasel. Again, there might be some overlap in these two lists. It's best to reach out to the Minnesota Department of the Natural Resources if you're finding that any of these animals are being nuisances. It is possible that they're nuisances on township-owned property, such as being destructive towards town, like the town hall. So in that case, you might have to reach out to either the Minnesota Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officer or the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. But normally townships don't have large amounts of farmland where taking these animals are more common. One animal kind of a key distinction in the processes that must be followed are beavers. Beavers have 5 separate methods in which they can be removed. 3 procedures stem from the township level. The other 2 are landowner specific. These township specific procedures stem from different powers that the township has. So the first is that the township is a road authority. The purpose of this law is to prevent any excess damage that may come from a beaver and a beaver dam within the immediate vicinity of a township road. So here, the road authority may remove a beaver and a dam if they are located within 500 feet of a township road. And this is a big if. So if it is blocking water drainage course and threatening to damage the road. So just because there's a beaver within 500 feet of the township road, the township doesn't have the authority to take that. It's only if that beaver is either blocking water drainage and that threatens to damage the road. If you have any questions about how, if there's a significant chance that there's damage or that damage to the road will occur, you can certainly reach out to either the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources or your county and ask if they have any indication as to water levels and beaver dams and how that is affecting drainage throughout the county or the township specifically. Towns can also remove beavers if they present damage to certain properties that the township owns or manages. The town may kill a beaver and remove its dam if it affects silvicultural. So this is tree farms or other types of forest-related projects, or if it affects drainage ditches, again, owned and managed by the township. So this goes back to a similar authority to the road authority, except we're seeing that the scope is expanded beyond that 500 feet. Again, if you have any questions that this may or may not damage drainage ditches or silvicultural projects, the town can certainly reach out to either someone at Minnesota Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Natural Resources, or their county, and just make sure that these procedures are being properly followed so that the town generally remains safe from any sort of liability that may come back to it by improperly removing a beaver. To continue on, the last method that the town can do is by establishing a bounty with Minnesota Fish and Wildlife. So we talked about bounties before. This is an additional bounty that the town can establish. However, the town does need to work with Minnesota Fish and Wildlife to ensure that this occurs. This is more of a future-proofing, a more forward-looking measure rather than correcting an immediate situation. This allows people within the township to remove beavers if they are interfering with or damaging public roads in the township, and if they cause damage to township owned or managed property, which can include drainage ditches and against silvicultural projects. Any town taking must include the conservation officer for a special, or contacting a conservation officer for a special beaver permit, and if that beaver is killed within 2 weeks before or after beaver trapping season. So the limitations here are if it's during beaver season, if it's 2 weeks before or after beaver season, or apologize, if it's only during before or after beaver season in that 2-week period. There is no requirement to receive a permit if the town already hired a licensed trapper during open trapping season, or if the town is outside that 2-week before and after period. Again, this all comes down to the beaver may be hired to be removed if it interferes with or damages public roads or causes damage to township-owned property. There are also landowner-specific measures. One is a district court procedure for, namely for off-property beaver dams. So if a landowner is concerned that a beaver in a dam are threatening their personal safety or is a serious threat to their property, they can petition to the district court in the county for removal of that dam. This allows that dam to be removed even if it is no longer on the landowner's property. The final measure or procedure would be following a similar process to the nuisance animal taking procedure that we discussed before. This can only be done on their personal property. It can only be done if it's causing damage to that property. And so those are generally the measures there that the township can take, or that the landowner can take. So just to quickly go over those measures, the town can take a beaver dam if it's within 500 feet and threatening a road as a township road authority. As a local government, the town can take beavers if it's threatening to damage either silvicultural projects or drainage ditches managed by the township. Thirdly, it can establish a bounty, and you would have to work with Minnesota Fish and Wildlife to ensure that the proper procedures are being met. Landowners can follow 2 methods, one for off-property in which they petition to district court, and the last is a nuisance taking procedure, very similar to what we discussed earlier regarding big game and other small game. Now we'll move on to farm animals at large, so we're out of kind of natural nuisances and more person-created nuisances, but still related back to animals in this case. There are 2 types of charges that can go on here for farm animals. The first is a civil charge. What this means is it's a one person to another person charging them for damages caused to them. Usually this will come back, and specifically for farm animals at large, this will come back as a matter of monetary compensation. So this relates to any cattle, horse, donkeys, mules, sheep, swine, or goat placed on the land if the landowner protests. So if someone is herding cattle onto someone else's property, they get told not to, but continue. That is grounds for the civil charge. Similarly, if a landowner allows their animals to run at large, in other words, allows them to escape the property and then not be quickly corralled, the landowner, again, will be liable for damages. The landowner is liable for triple the damages that the landowner incurred. So say crops were destroyed, the landowner suffered $10,000 in damages. That landowner can then sue the cattle owner for triple the damages. So he can sue him up to $30,000 for those damages. The town can also establish an ordinance that allows the town to restrain horses, cattle, sheep, swine, and other domestic animals from going on at large, specifically on township roads. So if any escaped animals are running along township roads, the township, with elector approval at the annual meeting, can establish an ordinance to ensure that there will be penalties in place if that does occur. If a township is going to put in place this ordinance, it's strongly recommended that you do work with a private township attorney, just to make sure that all the procedures are followed, as well as the ordinance is written correctly, so that when challenged, the ordinance is able to continue on. The ordinance is able to persist. The last thing I want to talk about here are animal pounds. In general, the township does not have any required responsibilities related to these pounds. It's also not required to remove stray animals. Again, township does not have responsibility here. The township also isn't required to be responsible if it's petitioned by the electors at the annual meeting in some way. So what this means is that if the electors at the annual meeting vote to either have a pound or an ordinance or both, that does not require the township board to establish those things. And we'll get more into why the township board may want to consider not establishing those things here in a moment. So just in general, the township's abilities come down to two things. The electors may allow a township board to establish a pound. And so this would include not only the pound, but any sort of pound masters that are involved, any sort of animal catchers that are involved, to ensure that the pound is properly functioning, to make sure that any at-large animals are restrained and can be maintained by the township. Further, the electors should also aid the township by developing an ordinance or allowing the town to create an ordinance that allows the township to actually impound domestic animals and create penalties for violation of having any sort of at-large domesticated animals. This will allow the town to not only impound the animals at the pound, but also recoup some of those costs that it may take on by hiring the individuals, building the building, maintaining the land, and those kinds of issues. Now, one of the issues here is that towns just do not have the volume that is normally seen when these pounds come up. So in a township, you may have 2, maybe even 10 stray animals a year, but that simply will not cover the costs of the pound or any sort of employees you may need to hire for the pound. You could certainly have town officials do it, so long as they're signing conflicts of interest resolutions and waivers. But again, this tends to be impractical and difficult and can take a lot of time away from these town officers where it could be directed in other places in assisting the townships. So in general, animal pounds are hard for towns to maintain just because of the sheer lack of number of need, and that leads to a lack of ability to continue to enforce. What this then leads to are the county's responsibilities in this. The county has the same, if not greater power than the township. So this means that the county can establish pounds. They can establish ordinances, impounding domestic animals and creating fees for those violations. And it can do anything else that would be required to run a animal pound. Further, the county has the means necessary to enforce the ordinance. So this means that the county will have the employee base to be able to hire pound masters, to be able to hire animal catchers. And if need be, to deliver citations, they have the law enforcement who can follow through with that. Same with the county attorney, who can, again, press charges if necessary, if those levels rise to that need within the county ordinance. The county also has the funding to do this. They just have a larger budget than the township. And with that larger budget, the county can address these issues more quickly. They can deliver the proper amount of time to make sure that things are being addressed. They also have the overall scope, meaning that by looking over the entire county, the county officials are able to see the proper number of animals rather than what's limited in one township with a few hundred residents. Even a few thousand residents, you still don't get the proper scope to really make these things practicable. Further, the counties just have the population to mitigate some of the difficulty involved, some of the narrowness that's generally involved. And with that, they can take the proper measures, and they'll have the proper amount of time to really deal with these animals that are at large. And so in general, kind of echoing what has been said throughout this presentation, if you are having concerns about at-large animals, be it domesticated or livestock that occur within the township, please reach out to your county, see what kind of enforcement measures your county has, how the town can be helpful in that, how the town can make sure that damages are being mitigated, that different ordinances are being enforced throughout the township. You can even look back at the farm animal at large. If the town establishes an ordinance that limits the ability for farm animals at large to be on township roads, you can reach out to the county to receive enforcement assistance in that. So here again, if you are going to, if you do need help regarding animal pounds, different at-large animals, it'd be great to reach out to your county and receive assistance from there. With that said, I will now take any questions. Again, if you do have any questions, please put those in the question box. I already see that there are several there, and we can start running through those. Otherwise, if you have questions, you can certainly put them in at this time. So the first question is from anonymous attendee. It states that the county and state road ditches are out of control with Canadian thistles. Our county weed inspector was notified and there are no results. Also, county contacted the state with no results because the state and county pay no taxes. How can this be enforced? That is a difficult situation. Again, it does really come down to a matter of you have to work with the county agricultural inspector, as well as the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. If they refuse, your options are limited. Those really are the two contact points provided by Minnesota law. And so not being, them being unresponsive, which tends to be, both parties being unresponsive tends to be fairly rare. I believe if you have any questions, the county agricultural inspector from earlier today recommended that you reach out to Emily Justine with the Department of Ag, and she should be able to help with any of those issues. Next question is from James Walt. He asks, are townships required to have a local weed inspector? By law, the township supervisor, the township supervisors, be that all three supervisors, or 5, depending on the size of your township board, are the local weed inspectors. They can defer that duty onto other contractors or employees, but by law, the township supervisors are local weed inspectors. And so not only is it a matter of being required to have those, but they are already made that person and have to comply with the weed inspections as listed. Anonymous attendee asked, who is to pick up the dogs that are wandering? Is it the sheriff's office or other individuals? Well, so this does depend. It's really a matter of who the person at the county level is. So this could include the sheriff's office. If they have specific dog catchers, it could be that person. And so you could certainly reach out to any of these people. Just reach out to the county in general, and they should be able to direct you to the proper person who picks up the wandering animals. Anonymous attendee asks, I found and reported noxious weed on county roadsides and a grant and aid trail, maybe a state trail. If these aren't addressed in the next year, should I continue to monitor these areas and report them? What other responsibility do we as in the township have in this situation? Yes, you should probably continue to monitor those areas and report them. Eventually someone should be able to, or someone will mitigate those issues. But it's your duty as the local weed inspector to inspect those properties and make sure they are being dealt with. And if not dealt with, the county agricultural inspector will help you in further movement. And so what responsibility do you as a township officer have in this situation? It would be to continue to inspect, to issue notices that weeds aren't being destroyed. And then with the aid of your county agricultural inspector, maybe issuing a notice of non-compliance. And if there's a continued issue there, that may, again, with the assistance of your county agricultural inspector, may lead into the township destroying those weeds and then receiving payment from those two parties in destroying those weeds. Tom says cats are not addressed in our animal ordinance. What is your recommendation what would you recommend to a landowner whose neighbor's cat is using her bird feeder as its hunting grounds? And that landowner can certainly reach out to the other landowner, ask him to restrain his cat. He could, I guess, follow up from there. But to some degree, that is outside of the township's scope. So the landowner can pursue other actions. It can reach out to, say, the county sheriff's office and figure out what's going on there. But otherwise, again, this is to some degree out of the township's hands. George asks, what statute covers bounties? So this will be Minnesota statutes 348.12 and Minnesota statutes 348.125. And finally, Minnesota statutes 348.13. These all cover bounties as well as different areas regarding bounties. So such as what animals may be taken, who may issue bounties, etc. Anonymous attendee asks, what statute drives the policy on beavers? So this will come back to Minnesota statutes 97B.667 as well as 97B.665. Karen asks, raccoons will move inside of corn dryers on farm sites on the off season. They cause expensive damage chewing up things. So these papers tell me that raccoons are protected. What are farmers to do? I'm sorry if there's some confusion there, Karen. What is stated here is, and there's a bit of a issue with the statute in being a little bit inconsistent, but at least under 97B.655, raccoons can be taken so long as a Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officer is notified. So what would it be best for these landowners is to reach out to their local Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officer and figure out what they would like as the proper procedure, whether that's receiving some sort of permit, if there's some sort of season they have to wait for, or if that just means that they can take the animal that's causing the destruction to the different equipment, and then notifying the officer thereafter. So in short, the answer to your question would be have those landowners reach out to their local Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officer to find the best procedure forward. Deanne has a question. If a landowner doesn't remove a beaver dam and the water backs up and affects a township road, may township, if this is within 500 feet, remove the beaver dam and charge the costs to the landowner? There's nothing I noticed that would allow the town to charge the costs to the landowner. Fortunately, this kind of comes back to that water issue where water is a enemy for everybody, or just a widespread enemy. So if it's causing damage to the township road and it's within 500 feet, the town can remove that. But I didn't notice anything that would allow the town to charge those costs. Andrew has a question. What is the best course of action for loose livestock that no owner will take ownership over? There really isn't a best course of action. It may come down to if your county has a animal pounding procedure, to reach out to your county and ask them how they can take that animal at large, how that animal at large can be removed, since it is or potentially causing injury to town land and landowner land. John has a question. Our township pays bounties on coyotes. Is there any problem with that? We've had a coyote problem and pay about $25 a year for the ones killed in our township. There is no issue with having bounty on coyotes. Towns can have set bounties for gophers, woodchucks, or certain gophers, gray gophers, striped gophers, and let me double check that here. Gray gophers and striped gophers, pocket gophers, woodchucks, ground squirrels, as well as coyotes. So there is no issue with having a resolution that pays out bounties for coyotes. This is the same question about raccoons. Again, reach out to Fish and Wildlife if you are having raccoon problems. Minnesota statute tells us two things. One, that they are a protected species, and two, they can be taken if they are, Minnesota Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officer is notified afterward. So again, reach out to your local officer and find the best procedure, their recommended procedure to do that. Matt has a question. If the township chooses not to have a pound master and pass it on to the county, who funds that landowner? Is it the township or the county? So if it's passed on to the county, it will be funded by the county and not the township. Essentially, the township can say, I don't want to take care of this issue. I will leave this to the county. You have better means to do it. And so the township, again, is within their right to do that. Bob has a question. What about our property for weed enforcement, also mining property? Again, any property in the township can be addressed. If there are noxious weeds, notify the landowner. work with the county agricultural inspector to make sure all those things all the proper procedures are being followed. And then you can, again, take the proper measures depending on enforcement or non-enforcement. Again, this can be DNR property, it can be mining property, it can be normal residential property. All the property should be inspected and ensured that there are no noxious weeds. William has a question. Is there a statute for the sheriff's office or the county to pick up stray dogs? I believe there is. I don't recall what that is off the top of my head. But again, like I said earlier, the county has essentially the same, if not greater powers than the township. And if the county decides to exercise those powers, it can utilize that to pick up stray dogs as necessary. Kay has a question. If a horse owner lets his horse free range onto the neighbor's property on the township and the county roads, and the person has been warned, what steps can be taken for the horse's safety? This will be, again, a matter of whoever the pound master is in your locality. So if this is the township can take the proper preventative measures, such as taking the stray animal and impounding it as necessary. If this is the county can take those measures and impound the animal. The town can certainly reach out to the county and notify them of this issue and make sure that the horse is being put into safe measures. But to some degree, if the town hasn't taken any sort of pounding powers, the town can reach out to the county, and the county then takes the role from there. Scott has a question. If a beaver dam is on private property but backing water onto the township road, are there liability issues? There are certainly issues to the township that if it has the means to prevent damage, it should take those actions. But if the town, if the beaver dam, for instance, is too far away, if it's more than those 500 feet, then the township's ability to take that beaver dam is very limited. And so there, the town can, is again, limited in what it can do, but that also then limits any sort of liability issues in that. John has a question. Is it the township's duty to talk with neighbors who have issues with dog trespassing? In short, it depends. If the town has not taken on any sort of pound master duties, then there are no duties to talk with the neighbor who has their dog trespassing. Those neighbors have to kind of work it out between themselves. If there are further issues and the county has that power, they can certainly reach out to the county and talk with that. But the township does not have the duty there to talk with the neighbors unless it, the township does not have the duty to talk with the neighbors.
Well, hey, Carl, I don't see any further questions in the Q&A section. So with that, we may be done for the day. So thank you all for joining. Rex or anybody else want to say, close this out for today?
Yeah, I'll just like to thank everybody for participating, thank our presenters, and thank you, Leslie, for conducting this.
Perfect. Thanks, you. I'll remind folks that you can register for additional short course classes on the MAT website, and everybody will need to register to get a new link to participate in that Zoom webinar, and recordings from today and all the handouts are available also on the MAT website in the spring course section. So thank you all. Take care.